Good afternoon and welcome to Willows Green Permaculture. Today I'm going to talk to you about canning. Basically, why here at Willows Green Permaculture we do almost no canning whatsoever. I'm going to explain why, and I'm going to tell you how we preserve pretty well all of our food to get through the winter and to get all the way through the year until the next harvest of the same thing. We're homesteaders. We grow 80 or 90% of our food, but we don't can. So if this is something you're interested in, then let's get started. It's February 12th today. Finally, we're getting a little bit of a respite from the cold weather. It doesn't look like we're getting a respite from the cold weather behind me, but there's a thermometer back there, and it says that it's just about freezing. 0 degrees Celsius, 32 degrees Fahrenheit. That's balmy compared to what it's been for the last month and a half. And a big subject in the middle of winter, of course, is canning. Canning, making jams, making sauces, and so on. And I'd like to talk about the fact that we don't do canning. And why don't we do canning? It's very simple, very, very simple. It's for health reasons. It's for maximizing the nutrition that we get from the food that we grow. And it's also for energy savings reasons. Now, you'd think that canning would save you energy because you can something and you can stick it on a shelf. You're going to save some energy with that respect. But generally, you shouldn't keep anything on the shelf for more than a year. If you've canned it yourself, I suppose some things can be kept for more than a year, and we have kept stuff for more than a year and use it because we have canned more in the past. But what we have observed in the past is the effort and the energy going into canning is way more than, let's say, freezing. So what I'm going to talk to you today is about the difference between canning and freezing, energy use, and so on. And of course, the other ways that we use to preserve. For example, whenever I see a video about somebody canning beans or canning, garbanzo beans or any type of bean, beans, I think, why are you going to go through all the effort to can beans when all you need is to make sure you've dried them properly, and then they'll last not only a year, they'll last 10 years, they'll last 100 years, they'll last 1,000 years. Why would you can beans? I suppose if it were the end of the world, you might want to have some canned beans, but then again, if it were the end of the world, I think the more important thing to know how to do is to simply grow your food. Because if everything else collapses, the earth is still there. You can grow your food. So, we freeze way more than we can. And in fact, it's gotten to the point where we basically freeze everything now. Everything, that can't be dried or kept fresh in a cool room or a garage. And we can almost nothing. Why? First of all, canning requires a lot of initial energy and effort. You have to basically cook everything, and basically, as far as we're concerned, overcook it, because you have to reach a certain temperature in order for the canning process to work correctly. And that cooking temperature, basically, we don't cook the stuff that we do up to that temperature, because when you overcook stuff, you are destroying most of the nutrients. You're losing most of the nutrients. It's best to cook things as least as possible. There are some items that, need some cooking. Like we don't, it's not like we eat everything raw. We don't. We eat stuff cooked, and there are certain things, of course, we eat raw. We eat lettuce raw. I like to eat carrots raw, but there's nothing wrong with a cooked carrot either. There are certain things you get out of a cooked carrot, and there are certain things you get out of a raw carrot. But it's the overcooking, and it's when you cook it, especially if you're overcooking it, you're losing your nutrients. But also when you cook it, you should eat it as soon as possible. Whereas with freezing is a natural process in nature. Happens all the time in cold climates. And plants don't die when they're frozen as well, if they're plants that, of course, that are perennial, that can live through this cold climate. Think of a carrot, think of a turnip, think of a potato. They can all last through a cold climate. All of them will grow again and again and again if we don't pick them. And so when we harvest, all of our stuff, and even our warm climate vegetables, like our tomatoes, our peppers, and so on, our fruit, our ground cherries, our elderberries, our grapes, what we're not going to eat in the following few days, we freeze right away, right after harvest. And so what happens? Well, they freeze right up pretty quick. Within 24 hours, they're frozen, if that long. And then what do? When it comes time to cook anything that we've frozen, we don't thaw it out before cooking it. Let's say a pepper. We've frozen a whole pepper. We might cut up the pepper before freezing it, but no, we prefer to freeze our stuff whole if we've got the space for it. If it's taking up too much space, yeah, we'll cut it up. Actually, Maggie would be the better one to talk about that. I'll show you our freezer in a bit, and you'll see we've got tons of cut up vegetables. You're not going to leave things like cabbage whole or kale whole. You're not going to leave pieces of kale. So all that kind of stuff, yeah, we'll cut it up in small pieces before freezing it. But let's say it is whole. Let's say you got a whole pepper. Well, we'll take it out of the freezer and maybe wait 5-10 minutes or 15 minutes and maybe put it under a little bit of warm water just to loosen up, and then we'll cut it up while it's pretty well mostly frozen. Not frozen solid, you can't get a knife through it, but when it's mostly still frozen. And then we'll stick it in the soup or the stew or the stir fry or whatever it is we're doing with it. And what happens? When you're putting something freshly harvested from the garden into the freezer, and then you're taking it out of the freezer and basically not thawing it and putting it right into the cooking process, and then we don't overcook it. We make sure that we cook it just right. Just enough to be cooked. What happens? It tastes like you have just harvested it. And that's amazing, because food you've canned will never give you that flavor of just harvested. But food you've frozen, if you do it right, will. When I first started doing this 35 years ago, and the few times that I freeze stuff, because back then I didn't freeze stuff as often, I didn't sort of know well enough. I did freeze some things sometimes if I didn't feel like canning them, and then I'd thaw them out when it was time to cook them. And then I'd always find they tasted really bad. But what I didn't realize was the process of letting them thaw out is also allowing them to start to basically decompose, because the freezing process does break let's say the cell membranes, because of the water inside the cell membranes. It's going to expand. When it solidifies, it crystallizes and solidifies, and then it breaks those cell membranes inside your vegetables. And then when you thaw it, well, all that stuff's going to leak out and start to decompose. And, might not, it's not going to decompose in an hour or two, but it's going to start to lose its flavor right away. And it's not going to last long at all, certainly not 24 hours, because it'll be like you're letting cooled down cooked food sit around for 24 hours. And that's where the bad taste comes from. And whereas if you take it out of the freezer and you don't thaw it out, you basically just do something. You've put it in the freezer, maybe you've cut it up into small pieces like we do with our kale, our beans, our cabbage and so on, and then it's already ready. And so that's probably the best strategy. And then you just put it right into your food. I started with talking about a whole pepper, but I should have probably talked about most of the stuff that we do cut up. So I'm talking about beans. I'm talking about, sugar snap peas, kale, cabbage, beets, everything. Anything you can think of that maybe comes in big pieces that you're going to freeze. If you cut it up, you stick it into bags into your freezer, Then basically you take it out of your freezer, frozen, and you throw it right into your saucepan with your whatever that's already warm. So it's going to go from frozen right into your warmed, food, and it's going to release all those flavors as it thaws directly into the food, and it's going to get cooked. And so it's not going to have time to start that decomposing process, and that's why it's going to taste so fresh. And it's to the point where many years ago I used to blanch my tomatoes to be able to pull off the skin. I used to blanch my beans, 30 seconds or whatever, just so they reach that kind of that certain color before sticking them into the freezer. Don't do any of that anymore, because that's basically cooking them. There's no reason to blanch your tomato. If you really want to get rid of that skin, that tomato skin, I don't know why you'd want to get rid of it unless they're basically non-organic tomatoes, but we grow our own tomatoes. There's no garbage on them. No pesticides, no garbage, nothing, which means the skin is great. Some people don't like the skin, but if you want to get rid of it, well, if you've frozen it, when you take it out of the freezer, if you do let it thaw a tiny little bit, you can still peel that skin off. Or when you put it into your saucepan, you can get that skin off, a few minutes later, let's say after it's been in the hot water a couple minutes. So we don't blanch our stuff either. We put it fresh and raw into the freezer. We'll just rinse it, wash it, whatever you want to say, cut it up in small pieces, stick it in the freezer. And then, of course, there are all the other things that don't need even to be frozen, like the beans. I talked to you about the fact that I don't know why anybody would make canned beans or canned garbanzos or canned anything like that when these will last forever dried. I get about 18 of these every year, 18 or 20 of these 1.5 liter jars, and they're wonderful. Go through a lot of beans because these are lots of protein in there. And so these are from last fall, but I even still have some left from 2024. I think I've got 2 jars of this left from the 2024 harvest. Beans, of course, grains, any of the grains, we just leave them on their stem until we need the grains, and then we'll thresh the stems, get the grains out, and then we'll put them through our stone grinder or through our spice blender to make flour out of them. And then things like squash, if you've got winter squash, well, you could just all that needs is to be put into a cool part of your house, not into the part of your house you're going to heat at room temperature or warmer than room temperature. If you like it nice and warm, then no, they'll go bad. You keep it in the coolest part of your house, but it doesn't have, in the basement or something. It doesn't have to be in the squash do not have to be in a cold room. We've kept them we don't have a cold room in our house. We do have the garage, which is cold, and that's where we keep our potatoes. As long as it doesn't go below 0, it's perfect for the potatoes. Potatoes are great between 0 and 6 degrees Celsius. They'll last all winter. Carrots, beets. Carrots and beets can stay inside a fridge for a couple months if they're in a nice damp towel and they have that access to dampness in the fridge. They'll last all winter in the fridge. And, if you're not opening and closing your freezer 5, 6, 10 times a day, then its use of energy is going to be very efficient. Basically, our freezer is like our grocery store, and we'll only go in there maximum once a day to get whatever we need for the day. Sometimes it's not even once a day. We'll get what we need for the next couple of days and have it in the fridge if needed, or we cook once for a couple of days, and so we don't need to go into the freezer every day. Another advantage is that when you freeze stuff, you don't have to worry about, let's say, your seal of your jar being old and not working anymore. They don't give those things away unless you're buying them wholesale. They're not cheap. They last maybe 2 or 3 times. On the box they recommend using them once. Of course, who's going to use one of those seals once? But when you reuse them again and again and again, at some point they stop working, and then you lose something because because you don't notice and it's gone bad in the in the cupboard or whatever, because the seal loosened and whatever was inside went bad. Now, you do have to be careful when you're using the freezer. If you're using jars, well, you don't want to fill the jar up to the top. You want to, especially if the jar goes like this. If you're putting a liquid in a jar that you're going to put in the freezer, then, well, I'll show it to you. You want to leave it below. You want to leave the top of it below the curving part of the jar, because you don't want your jar to break from the liquid expanding. And so that's why, you can use bags. If you use a good quality, basically a strong bag that you can wash and reuse again and again, then that's great. And the other thing is, when you're using a freezer, is basically you're going to cut up your stuff, put it in, wash your stuff, cut it up, put it into bags, put it in the freezer, and you're ready for it. And then when you're ready for it, you're just going to take it out and throw it into your cooking pot. So it's a time saver, because the other way, you're basically cooking it thoroughly, and then you're canning it, you're putting it in, you're having to, you're sterilizing your jars, you're putting this cooked material into that. You've put all sorts of ingredients, like maybe pectin, maybe lots of sugar, or lots of salt, or some kind of acidifier like lemon juice or whatever, all these extra ingredients. And then you're gonna give it a water bath or a pressure, what's it called, a pressure canner. It's all sorts of extra steps, all sorts of extra energy. And once again, as far as I'm concerned, you're overcooking the food. It's, as far as we're concerned, it's a time saver, it's an energy saver. And the food that you've frozen fresh with no added ingredients is gonna be so much better for your health in the wintertime. It's going to be as close to freshly harvested food that you can get 6 months, 8 months, 10 months after the harvest. And that is something else. Well, let's go and have a look at the freezer, and you can see what we've got. So we have 3 freezers, this one right here beside me, and this little chest freezer, and we have this freezer right here. We also keep an old leaky fridge in the garage, which is really convenient. We had to get rid of it anyway inside the house because it was wrecking our floors. But it's fine in the concrete floor of the garage, and it's got the freezer at the bottom of it. So like I said, we keep our freezers in the garage, which probably also very, very slightly increase the temperature inside the garage in the wintertime, which is kind of nice because, of course, we've got all these freezer motors and they're trying to keep everything cold inside. So they're taking the heat out of whatever's in there, and they're putting that into the rest of the garage. So they probably bring up the temperature maybe by 0.5 degree, which is good, fine by us. So let's have a look and see inside our freezers. So here we go. Let's have a look. You can see here we got whole beans here, all sorts of whole beans. Harvest them right up until the end of August, and then we let the rest turn into dried beans. We got carrots, because Maggie likes to freeze some carrots too sometimes. We got lots of zucchini, the green squash and so on. All sorts of different types of greens here. I'm not even sure what it all is. I'm not going to pull it all out to look at the labels. I'm not doing an ad for these bags or whatever. But there's kale, there's cabbage, all sorts of greens. There's spinach, all sorts of stuff. Peppers. Look at these beautiful whole Jimmy Nardello peppers. Wonderful. And then there's all sorts of tomatoes here. These cherry-sized tomatoes are great because you just throw them into the pot and they're going to be delicious. Here in our other freezer, we've got all sorts of fruit. Like we've got some raspberries here, some currants, some elderberry, some grapes, some black raspberries, all sorts of stuff. We'll also freeze our bread after we've cooked a lot of it. Sauces sometimes, and we'll freeze those. And, or fruit sauce like rhubarb sauce here, and freeze that. Frozen elderberry juice here. Here's some frozen tomato sauces, but once again, these are barely cooked. Basically, just enough to be able to pour them in there and freeze them. And as you can see, have a look here. You see where, you see this, you see the straight red line there? That is where the top was. And you can see how the crystals went higher than that. Okay, that's why it's important. If that red line of tomato sauce had gone all the way to the top, this jar would be broken. And what we got? Elderberry here, it looks like. And all sorts. We got bags and bags of more greens here. And, you know, everything. I'm not wearing my glasses. Bread. Lots of elderberry and grape in the bottom there in those gray bags. This freezer's basically, well, it started the winter. It was almost full of grape and elderberry. And this chest freezer here. Here's another example of a jar, how far we filled it. This has got some rhubarb sauce in there. So as you can see, this is what we filled it up to. And you can see the crystallization that went up. But because the you know, the thickest part is right here, it had room to expand, and so it didn't break that curved part in the top. Now, if your jars are a little bit straighter, then you can fill them closer to the top. But if they've got that curve there, you really want to avoid it. And if you really want to be safe, well, you can even fill your stuff less if you got room in your freezer for it. We use all sorts of different types of bags. We use these as well. They're a good alternative to the other ones. See what we got in here. We got, for example, some chives, frozen chives, which is really kind of nice. Okay, so just throw those into your food frozen like that. More peppers in here. And then, of course, there are all the vegetables that you can just keep around as decorations until you need to use them. These ones are almost all done. And so many herbs that, of course, you can just dry and keep all winter. This is a little cubby hole under our front landing, and it's where we keep our squash. As you can see, it's not a cold room. It's inside the house, it's inside the insulation. Check our squash at least once a week, if not more often. Sometimes we'll find the odd one that needs to go out into the compost. However, if it's not too far gone, we'll collect the seed to use that to eat. Sometimes the rot hasn't reached as far inside all the way to the seeds. It's just reached some of the flesh, and so we will compost that, and then we'll dry the seeds if they're still intact. I hope you liked the video. Hope you learned something from it. If you enjoyed it, then please give it the thumbs up and share it with your friends. Don't forget to leave a comment or a question if you have any. As you know, I answer them all. And if you need seeds for anything that I talk about in these videos, then check out our seed catalog at willowsgreenpermaculture.com. You can buy some of our seeds. That would be a great way you can support us. Thank you very much for watching. Have a wonderful week, and we will see you next time. Here are some winter scenes from December, before we got most of our snow.